Part 1. The Harm Thesis and the Epicurean Challenge. The question of whether dying is bad for the person who dies might seem simple at first glance. Most would instinctively say yes. After all, death appears to be the worst fate imaginable. But this instinct comes up against a hefty philosophical riddle that's been debated for over 2 millennia. Epicurus, a Greek philosopher from way back, introduced an argument that's at the heart of discussions on whether death is bad. His logic appears airtight. Death, after all, means the end of consciousness. You don't exist anymore once you're gone. No sensations, no feelings, no awareness. Epicurus asks, how can something harm you when you're not even there to experience it? As he famously put it, death is nothing to us, for when we exist, death is not present, and when death is present, we do not exist. They can't coexist. So, Epicurus argues, death can't really injure the person who dies. This perspective has significant implications for mental health. If Epicurus is correct, dreading death is a massive waste of mental resources. We are afraid of something that can't truly harm us, much like fearing a villain who never makes an appearance. We could lead calm lives, free from what Epicurus termed a major human affliction, the fear of dying. But Epicurus's view runs into a problem. It contradicts a deep-seated intuition we all share. When a vibrant 25-year-old dies in an accident, we don't just witness the sorrow of their loved ones. We feel that the young person has suffered a terrible loss too. She had dreams, relationships, and unfinished business. The tragedy isn't only for her loved ones, it's a tragedy for her as well. Epicurus's stance seems to neglect a belief many of us hold, that death can indeed be a significant loss for the deceased. This is where modern philosophy comes in, particularly with the deprivation account of why death is bad. This idea, especially championed by philosopher Thomas Nagel, concedes that being dead isn't inherently a bad experience, since there's no one to feel anything. However, death can still be bad because it strips you of the good experiences you would have had. Think of it like this. Imagine a friend betrays you, but you're blissfully unaware. Your whole life, you think they're loyal. The betrayal doesn't cause you distress since you never find out. Still, many would argue it fundamentally harms you because it diminishes your life's quality, even if you never feel hurt by it. Similarly, death means your life is cut short, missing out on all those moments that could have enhanced it, despite death itself not feeling bad. This is what's known as comparative harm. Death is harmful not because it feels terrible, but because it halts your life's journey. If you were poised for more joy, love, achievements, and beauty, death snatches those away. The harm is in the lost opportunities, not in any negative experiences. Consider Nagel's example. A smart, accomplished individual suffers brain damage, leaving them with the mentality of a happy infant. Though happy, they're oblivious to their loss. We view this as a tragedy because it takes away their abilities, curtails their potential, and erases who they were. Death is like that, but irreversible. It closes all future doors. The deprivation account has its challenges too. The biggest issue is the timing puzzle, which Epicurus highlighted ages ago. If death robs you of future benefits, when does this harm occur? It can't happen before death, since you're living then. It can't occur at the moment of death, as that moment is fleeting, and it can't be after death, as you no longer exist. So, when exactly does death make you worse off? Supporters of the deprivation account have a range of answers. One is to argue that harms don't need to take place at a specific time. Death isn't so great because it reduces the total good stuff you could have had in life. Imagine two versions of your life, the one that actually happened and a longer one that could have been. It's like reading a short story that missed its potential, not because the writing was bad, but because it ended too early. A life that's cut short can feel the same way. This idea opens up some interesting questions. If missing future good things due to death is harmful, does that mean being born later is also harmful? If you'd been born 10 years earlier, you'd have had those extra years of experiences. So, does your actual birth date steal those years from you? Yet, we typically don't see our birth date as unfortunate. This is what's called the asymmetry problem. Missing out on good experiences by being born late and by dying both seem negative, but death feels worse. Philosophers Anthony Bruckner and John Martin Fisher suggest it's because we humans tend to focus on future plans and goals, unlike how we process the past. Death interrupts these forward-looking plans, whereas a later birth doesn't impact what we already have. Critics argue this just describes our mindset, not its correctness. Maybe our obsession with the future is an irrational instinct aimed at survival and reproduction. If that's true, worrying about future losses might not mean they're actually worse. The deprivation idea doesn't always hold up, especially when death isn't really robbing anything positive. Think about someone in terrible pain with no way of recovering. For them, life is all about suffering, and death might actually be a comfort. It seems like whether death is bad depends on what kind of future you were looking at, making death's negativity conditional, not absolute. This has real-world implications, suggesting that how we react to death should adapt to each unique situation. Losing a happy child feels especially heartbreaking because of the missed potential, whereas the death of someone suffering at life's end might be less tragic, or even a mercy. This often matches what people feel intuitively, but it makes death seem less of a big deal universally. There's also the issue of the better alternative problem. If death is bad because it takes away the good things, the question is, which good things are we talking about? If someone dies at 70, should we compare that to living until 71 or 80 or maybe even 100? And why stop there? Should it be compared to living 200 years or even forever? If an eternal life is our benchmark, then every death seems infinitely bad because it stops infinite good experiences, which sounds pretty extreme. Those in favor of the deprivation view usually counter by saying the right comparison is with the life you would likely have had if you hadn't died when you did. For instance, if you die of a heart attack at 70, compare that to living maybe until 85. Death may have taken those 15 years, not an infinite number. The harm is substantial, but not limitless. But even this shows that judging how bad death is needs context. The same death can seem more or less tragic depending on what other outcomes we consider. An elderly person dying too soon at 80 experiences harm only if they were otherwise headed for more good years. If not, perhaps their death didn't cut their potential by much. The badness of death doesn't come from dying itself, but from the complex scenarios we dream up as alternatives. An Epicurean might keep asking, even if we admit that death robs people of things, why should this loss matter to the person who has died? Once you're dead, you can't worry about what you've missed. Imagine being deeply involved in a project that's going to take another 5 years to complete. Then, suddenly, you're gone. The project is left unfinished. But why stress about that if you're not around to worry about loose ends? Your dreams, goals, and beliefs vanish with your awareness. In a state of non-existence, nothing really matters. This point unearths an important idea. For a loss to matter, we need to assess someone's life quality even after they've gone. It looks at life's worth as something to be measured in entirety, not just by the person themselves. And that's not outlandish. We value art that remains significant long after the artist has died. But it requires us to believe that suffering and benefit don't need to be felt to be real. Things get complicated when we delve into personal identity. Who exactly suffers from death? A 40-year-old who dies isn't the same as the 60-year-old they would have become. Different cells, unique memories, newly developed traits. How does death affect the 60-year-old who never exists? Maybe death doesn't harm a person, but rather a possible life pathway. Yet life paths are abstract and can't be seen as harmed or benefited in a moral sense. These philosophical puzzles might seem detached from everyday concerns, but they have genuine consequences. In medical ethics, whether death harms a patient sways decisions about life support, euthanasia, and resource allocation. In the legal arena, wrongful death suits rely on death being a harm worthy of compensation. In psychology, deciding whether to treat death as an adversary or a natural part of life partly depends on whether death is truly bad for the deceased. The harm thesis shows one thing. Even the most basic beliefs about death are complex to unravel. Thinking that death is harmful to the deceased seems obvious until you try to nail down how, when, and why. The Epicurean challenge prompts us to get clear on harm, value, and well-being. The deprivation theory provides a nuanced answer, but raises more questions about time, identity, and hypothetical scenarios. Crucially, this debate reveals that value and harm aren't just about subjective feelings. The deprivation theory argues it is objectively true that a curtailed life is worse for the individual, even if they never feel that negativity. This suggests a notion of human flourishing beyond just feeling good at the moment. It indicates that what matters is not just how life feels internally, but how it unfolds in totality compared to potential outcomes. The conversation goes on, evolving with each new generation of philosophers who bring fresh perspectives to this age-old question. We haven't settled on a clear answer because this issue taps into something profoundly fundamental about human value and meaning. Our beliefs about the harm of death shape how we live our lives, the risks we're willing to take, the sacrifices we make, and how we care for the dying and support those in mourning. These philosophical debates are vital because they address what truly counts in life. Part 2. Embracing Mortality, Heidegger and the Search for True Self. Martin Heidegger didn't perceive death as just a biological event to study from afar. He considered it a vital element of human life that deeply influences our identity. His book, Being and Time, offers one of the most important and complex philosophical views on mortality from the 20th century. Unlike Epicurus, who pondered whether death harms us, or Nagel, who viewed it as taking something from us, Heidegger focused on how acknowledging our mortality is intertwined with the essence of human existence. Heidegger introduced the concept of Dasein, a German term for being there, to denote human existence. What makes Dasein unique from other lives is that it cares about its own existence. A rock simply exists, and a tree follows its natural course. But humans must actively decide how to live. We can't avoid making choices about our lives, and this necessity defines what it means to be human. A key element of Heidegger's philosophy is the idea of being toward death. This doesn't suggest obsessing over death or dwelling on it constantly. It means seeing death as a basic part of living across time. From the moment we're born, death is a possibility. It's not some remote endpoint we're gradually heading towards. Our lives are always under its shadow. Heidegger described this as imminent imminence, indicating that death is inevitable, yet timing unknown. Picture a fruit maturing. It doesn't just reach ripeness at the end. It's in the process all along. Similarly, dying isn't an event just at life's end. It's part of living. We're beings moving towards death, constantly inching toward our ultimate potential. While it might sound like wordplay, it's a powerful revelation from Heidegger. Mortality isn't just an external fact. It's crucial to how we live our lives. Every goal we pursue, every relationship we form, every choice we make echoes our limited existence. Death is the boundary shaping our lives. Heidegger also explores the difference between living authentically and inauthentically. Most of the time, we live inauthentically, swallowed up by what he calls the they, the impersonal forces of societal norms, expectations, and roles. The they dictates what we value, fear, and how we live. We lose ourselves in daily distractions and disconnect from the reality that we're finite beings heading for an end. The they has a standard way of dealing with death. When someone dies, phrases like people die or death occurs are used. We acknowledge death, yet keep it distant. Sure, people die, but not us, not now. Death turns into something that happens to others, handled through societal practices, but never deeply confronted. This evasion is what Heidegger described as fleeing in the face of death. We know we'll eventually die, but fail to internalize our mortality, instead numbing ourselves with busy schedules and social conventions. We pretend we have endless time, acknowledging death, but seeing it as a far-off occurrence affecting others first. To live authentically means changing how we relate to death. It requires what Heidegger calls anticipation, or running ahead toward death. This doesn't involve brooding over death, but accepting it as a personal journey no one can make for you. Your death is solely yours, an experience lived in complete solitude. When you truly prepare to face your own death, something profound happens. You get that life isn't infinite, that time ticks away fast, and your choices aren't endless. This leads to a feeling that philosopher Heidegger calls anxiety, which is different from mere fear. Fear is simple. It targets clear threats, like getting a serious illness or having an accident. Anxiety, in contrast, doesn't have a specific focus. In moments of anxiety, everything that felt normal now seems off, and the reality you once knew feels wobbly. Though anxiety is tough to sit with, and we usually try to dodge it, Heidegger considers it super revealing. In those anxious periods, the conventional roles and identities you've absorbed from society vanish. You're left facing your life, a finite one that you alone must embrace without any guaranteed meaning, and with the pressure of choosing who you'll be. Yes, it sounds daunting, and it is, but Heidegger spots a shot at freedom here. Grasping life's limits and owning the task of self-creation shows that you're free to pick your own path. Typical social rules lose their hold on you. You can genuinely own your life, making decisions based on who you really are rather than just meeting society's expectations. Heidegger called this sense of ownership and embracing mortality resoluteness. It's about consciously deciding to be true to yourself, accepting life's finite nature, and taking full responsibility for your decisions. This doesn't mean you need a rigid life plan, but rather a clear understanding of who you are and what really matters to you, not clouded by the comforting falsehood of permanence. Let's apply this to the real world. Someone living an inauthentic life delays big decisions, always thinking there's time later. They give up deep commitments in exchange for social approval, thinking their true life will begin someday. They avoid hard conversations and put off meaningful actions as if time were infinite and their life belonged to everyone but themselves. On the flip side, someone living authentically sees the urgency of life's finite nature. Not every road is open. Picking one path means not choosing others. They can't waste time on things or people that don't genuinely matter to them. Death shapes life and demands it be taken seriously because your time is limited and yours to make the most of. But not everyone agrees with Heidegger's perspective. First, is his notion of authentic versus inauthentic life just a description? Or is it advice on how we should live? Heidegger claims it's just an analysis, yet his words suggest that living authentically is preferable. If he recommends authenticity, why is that the way to go? Secondly, critics highlight that his view seems a bit too individualistic. The idea of becoming authentically aware of death is a lonely pursuit, as death is faced alone. This focus suggests relationships like love, friendship, and community might be distractions. But Heidegger would argue true relationships bloom after acknowledging mortality. Still, some folks aren't convinced. They argue that prioritizing individual existence over connections misinterprets what it means to be human. And then there's something quirky about Heidegger's view on anxiety. He mentions anxiety as exposing the lack of solid footing in life, no ultimate reason for our actions and values. In anxious moments, we confront the plain fact that we exist without knowing why or for what. Yet, Heidegger argues that living authentically means bravely choosing your path. But if life truly lacks a foundation and there's no objective way to decide, how can one decision be more authentic than another? Doesn't the realization of life's meaningless cast doubt on any kind of authentic commitment? Some feminist and social critics contend that Heidegger's views stem from a particularly male, Western, and privileged perspective. The freedom to chart your own life assumes you have certain social and material resources, which many people simply don't. For individuals struggling to survive, battling systemic injustice, or caring for others, the idea of self-creation might feel like an unreachable privilege. Heidegger's concept of Dasein seems to describe an abstract person, detached from actual social contexts and relationships that involve care and connection. So, let's dive into whether Heidegger's take on death really clicks psychologically. Is the fear of death as crucial as he suggests? Or maybe it says more about his own worries than a universal human truth? Studies show lots of folks don't lose sleep over existential death anxiety and are pretty happy dealing with their daily stuff. Is being caught up in everyday life dodging authenticity? Or is it just a sign of having a good outlook on life? Despite the critiques, Heidegger's ideas have a lot of weight. He doesn't just view death as a biological fact or simple loss, but as a core piece that gives our lives meaning. The thought that we're beings inevitably facing death, with our finiteness at the heart of our existence, has made waves across philosophy, psychology, theology, and literature. Heidegger nudges us to think, what does it really mean to embrace our mortality fully? Sure, most of us accept that we will die, but do we live like we truly get that? We procrastinate, adjust our paths, and lose direction. Heidegger challenges us to live with a keen awareness of our limits, letting this insight shape our decisions and values. The existential therapy scene, drawing inspiration from Heidegger's work, brings these concepts into the therapy room. Therapists using this approach encourage clients to confront their fear of death, not to eliminate it, but to let it ignite a more genuine way of living. Clients may come to see that they've been living by others' standards or putting off their true desires, thinking they have endless time. They may have ignored uncomfortable truths for the sake of comfort. For these folks, accepting their limited lifespan might push them to make meaningful changes. Death turns into a guide rather than a foe. But it's important to remember not to idealize death or become consumed by anxiety. Not everyone finds their true self through awareness of death. Some people might freeze up, feeling that death makes everything pointless, making it hard to commit to anything. Others might take reckless actions, dropping responsibilities in the name of living authentically. Some might put on a facade of being different, but still deeply stick to societal norms. Heidegger doesn't dish out a lot of practical advice on how to live authentically. His guidance is more abstract and general. He urges us to face death, make solid decisions, and own our lives. But he doesn't clearly outline what to choose or the best ways to live. He believes authenticity can't be dictated, and each person has to discover it on their own. This means his philosophy can be twisted to fit any belief system or lifestyle claiming to be against the norm. More troubling, Heidegger's own history raises questions about the gap between his teachings and his actions. He joined the Nazi Party in 1933 and led Freiburg University during that era. His later attempts to defend or clarify this chapter of his life didn't really cut it. Learning about Heidegger's personal life doesn't automatically nullify his philosophical ideas, but it does prompt us to wonder if truly coming to terms with death makes one act morally. You can accept the reality of your death and still end up making some poor choices. Perhaps the biggest gap in Heidegger's argument is this. By emphasizing death so much, isn't there a risk of making life just about prepping for the end? There seems to be something a bit bleak in a philosophy that mainly revolves around the idea of non-existence. Sure, we're all headed toward death, and that counts. But isn't there so much more to us? Our capacity to love, create, enjoy life, and be amazed by the world. Doesn't focusing too intensely on death eclipse these other fantastic parts of the human experience? Some existentialists coming after him tried to blend Heidegger's emphasis on death with a zest for life's brighter moments. Take Albert Camus, for example, who argued we should combat our inevitable end by soaking in life's beauty, absurd as it is. Simone de Beauvoir highlighted the complexity of human life, acknowledging our limits, but pointing out our power to rise above them through our goals and relationships. Emmanuel Levinas completely challenged Heidegger's stance, proposing that ethics and our relationships with others come before brooding over death. What's really valuable in Heidegger's perspective is seeing death not just as an endpoint, but as a factor that shapes how we live every single day. How we deal with the reality of being human affects our choices, relationships, the gambles we take, and the significance we find in our lives. Whether or not we fully buy into Heidegger's ideas, he's spot on with one thing. Our lives are framed by our birth and eventual death, and this time frame is crucial in shaping our identity. Heidegger presents a pressing practical question. How should we live with the knowledge that we're not immortal? Should we constantly keep death in our thoughts, or does that lead us down a dark path? Should we try to ignore it and just focus on enjoying life, or does that risk a shallow existence? Maybe there's a balance between obsessing over death and completely ignoring it. These aren't questions with simple answers, but Heidegger ensures that we can't truly ponder human existence without confronting them. Part 3. Terror Management, How We Deny Death. While Heidegger tackled the idea of death from a philosophical angle, similar explorations kicked off in psychology and anthropology too. This research highlights that our awareness of death influences our actions more deeply and subconsciously than we usually realize. The terror management theory, inspired by Ernest Becker's work and thoroughly examined over the past 3 decades, paints a grim picture. What we recognize as human culture exists largely to distract us from contemplating death. Becker's 1973 work, The Denial of Death, won the Pulitzer Prize merely 2 months after he lost his battle with cancer. The book melds ideas from Freud, Kierkegaard, Otto Rank, and others into a comprehensive theory about human motivation. Becker's main point is clear. Our fear of death drives much of our behavior. Most of our actions, whether alone or with others, work to deny, soften, or symbolically conquer our mortality. Becker observed that humans occupy a unique and uneasy spot in nature. We're living creatures, bound to decay and death like any other, but with the added twist of symbolic consciousness. We can think abstractly, imagine the future, and reflect on ourselves. This combination sets up an existential conflict. We have a strong instinct to stay alive, yet we know we're going to die. Becker summed it up provocatively. We're like gods with anuses, beings capable of contemplating the infinite while stuck in bodies doomed to fail. This awareness creates what Becker called the terror of death. It's not just fear. It's a terror so profound it could cripple us with anxiety. Thinking about non-existence, the world continuing without us, and everything simply ending, triggers deep dread. Confronting this terror constantly could paralyze us, leaving us unable to function. Yet, we do manage to carry on. We get up each day, work, form relationships, and chase after our dreams. So, how do we function with the constant reminder of our mortality? Becker believed we construct complex psychological and cultural defenses that help us ignore or minimize death's influence. These defenses aren't conscious choices. They operate mostly beneath our awareness, influencing our behavior stealthily. Becker saw culture as our most crucial defense system. Societies create what he called a cultural worldview, a collective belief system that makes life feel purposeful and hints at ways to transcend death. Religious views offer literal immortality through an afterlife, whereas secular ones promise symbolic immortality through lasting achievements, contributions to humanity, or merging with a greater cause, be it a nation, humanity, or the advancement of knowledge. These worldviews serve two major functions. First, they provide a framework that gives life meaning by explaining our origins, purpose, importance, and how we should live. This sense of meaning shields us from the existential dread that might emerge when considering our cosmic unimportance. Second, they offer criteria for what's valued, allowing individuals to gain self-esteem by meeting these cultural ideals. Meeting these standards, whether as a good Christian, successful business person, loving parent, or respected academic, provides a sense of personal value that helps fend off death-related anxiety. Becker referred to individual efforts to find significance within a cultural framework as heroism projects or immortality projects. These are the pursuits and achievements through which we try to matter, to stand out, and make a lasting impact. The details vary across cultures. In one culture, heroism could be about religious devotion and sacrifice. In another, it might focus on amassing wealth and power, while elsewhere, it could revolve around artistic expression or scientific discovery. At their core, these efforts share the same psychological goal: to create a sense of personal worth that endures beyond death. This deep dive into human behavior reveals something unsettling. Many of our loftiest goals, like creating art, science, philosophy, religion, and pushing society forward, might actually be born out of our fear of dying. Sometimes what we boast about creating is, in part, just a complex way to deny that death is inevitable. While Becker didn't say this explains human achievements entirely, he did hint that dodging death could really drive us, often without us even realizing it. Everything changed when social psychologists Jeff Greenberg, Sheldon Solomon, and Tom Paschinski built Ernest Becker's ideas into terror management theory and began thoroughly testing these thoughts. Since the 1980s, they've done over 1,000 experiments, providing strong backing for Becker's big ideas. The experiments are simple, but revealing. Researchers trigger mortality salience by making people actively think about their own death, usually by getting them to write a bit about it. Others might write about dental pain instead, letting them serve as a control group dealing with unpleasant but non-deadly situations. After a short break to let these thoughts settle in subconsciously, researchers check out various attitudes and behaviors to see eye-opening results. Faced with reminders of mortality, folks often cling more to their cultural beliefs. For example, American participants thinking about death felt more patriotic towards America and more critical of other nations. People with religious faith became more devout, too. There's a tendency to judge more harshly those straying from cultural norms and favor those who conform. This isn't just a one-culture deal. It's everywhere, spanning different cultures, ages, and personalities. And it doesn't stop there. Thoughts about death get people trying to boost their self-esteem. They care more about appearances, become more materialistic and competitive, rate themselves higher, and flock to anyone who praises them. They also spark more interest in romance and having kids, both seen as ways to achieve a kind of immortality. One of the more troubling aspects is how this heightened awareness of death makes prejudice and aggression more common. People become more hostile to others with different religions, ethnicities, or political beliefs, support aggressive military actions, and favor harsher legal penalties. They get more conformist, less open to opposing views, and rally around charismatic leaders promising safety and reassurance. The theory calls this worldview defense. If your cultural beliefs shield you from fearing death, anyone questioning these beliefs can shake up your mental balance. Those who differ in beliefs, values, or lifestyles threaten that balance because their existence suggests that your perspective could be wrong. If it is wrong, your defense against the fear of death falls apart. So, the knee-jerk reaction is to criticize, exclude, or even eliminate those who differ. This has big implications for understanding human conflicts. Much group violence, including religious wars, ethnic cleansing, and political persecution, may come from unconscious fears tied to death. Group identity often defines itself against others to boost their sense of importance and unity. By blaming outside enemies, they can redirect and ease their own crippling fear of death. The theory also explains why people cling to irrational beliefs, even when evidence suggests they're wrong. If a belief system helps calm fears of death by managing death anxiety, any challenge to that system threatens their peace of mind. People might ignore or spin facts to hold on to beliefs that keep fear at bay, affecting everything from religious beliefs to any well-held perspective, like political stances, scientific opinions, or cultural identity. Research uses these insights to account for behaviors like consumerism and neglecting the environment. The consumer world promises symbols of immortality, promising status, beauty, and a lasting legacy through the stuff we buy. Sometimes we gather possessions to feel a sense of security when everything else seems fleeting. Our environmental issues may persist because fixing them requires us to confront our vulnerability and mortality, while nature just keeps on. Terror management theory sheds light on the importance of self-esteem. But why is self-esteem such a crucial thing for everyone? Traditional psychology didn't have a clear answer. According to terror management theory, self-esteem comes from feeling like a valuable player in your cultural group, which helps you deal with the fear of dying. Research shows that boosting our self-esteem generally reduces anxiety, particularly the fear of death. However, when our self-esteem is challenged, it brings thoughts of mortality to the surface. This is why we care about our social status, how we stack up against others, and how we're perceived. For our self-esteem, we need others to affirm our value, show we fit cultural standards, and indicate that our lives are meaningful. This makes us especially sensitive to others' opinions and fearful of rejection. Not everyone buys into terror management theory, though. Some doubt the chicken or egg scenario. Does the fear of death drive us to latch onto culture and self-esteem? Or do threats to these spark death fears? The theory leans toward the former, but the evidence usually just shows correlation, not causation. Maybe our appreciation for culture and self-esteem started for different reasons, and easing death anxiety was just a bonus. The theory might also overemphasize death's role in our actions. People are motivated by a range of factors like attraction, status, curiosity, empathy, and finding purpose, not merely fear of dying. To say all cultural achievements are about death, denial simplifies things too much. While art, science, and love might involve overcoming mortality concerns, they're also about beauty, truth, and human connection. Different cultures around the world have unique ways of handling death. Some embrace it rather than deny it. Buddhism suggests meditating on mortality and impermanence. Stoics believe pondering mortality can enhance life. In Mexican culture, the Day of the Dead celebrates death. These practices don't just negate dying, they actually confront it. Terror management theory struggles to accommodate these global ways of dealing with death. The theory also poses political questions. If contemplating death makes people more biased, authoritarian, or aggressive, should we discourage it? Should we keep people distracted to prevent violence? That doesn't seem feasible or ethical. Plus, some findings suggest that thinking about death can lead to more compassion and kindness instead of defensiveness. Another problem is that lab experiments on terror management might not truly reflect how death awareness plays out in real life. Writing about your own death in a lab is strange and doesn't mirror how death-related thoughts naturally arise in everyday life. Does this really show how subtly death influences daily behaviors, or does it just induce an intense anxiety that results in unusual actions? Advocates of the theory argue that decades of research from different methods and cultures back up its claims. They acknowledge that death anxiety isn't the only motivator, but insist it's more common and impactful than we realize. They also distinguish between consciously considering death, which can have positive effects, and subconscious fears of dying, which can lead to defensive and harmful behavior. The theory has also evolved to explain how we handle death when it's a direct concern versus when it's a background thought. When death is at the forefront, we tend to make rational choices, like seeking medical aid or avoiding danger. When thoughts of death quietly hover in the background, people often latch on to things like cultural pride or boosting their self-esteem for a sense of protection. How someone responds usually shifts based on whether they're directly thinking about death or if those thoughts are just beneath the surface. New studies are exploring whether there's an upside to how we handle the fear of death. Can an awareness of mortality spark growth, compassion, and wisdom instead of just defensiveness or aggression? Some research suggests it can. If you reflect on death while feeling connected to nature or a sense of something greater, you might find yourself more thankful, giving, and concerned about future generations. The aim is to create situations where awareness of mortality prompts positive change rather than attempts to prove oneself. The big takeaway from this theory may be that much of what drives us stems from anxiety more than we're typically aware of. Freud talked about our buried desires. Terror management theory shines a light on our hidden fears. Usually, people aren't making choices based on deep reflections about true values. They're often trying to soothe the subconscious fear of death. This has major implications for how we understand our actions and those of others. Someone adamantly defending their political stance might not be relying on facts, but rather fending off anxiety. A culture that treats outsiders harshly might not be reacting to actual threats, but making a symbolic stand against mortality. When someone pursues status, it might stem less from genuine interest and more from a quest for meaning in the face of life's end. If terror management theory holds true, a lot of what seems rational or noble in human behavior actually springs from dodging thoughts of death. This idea doesn't have to be seen as solely negative. Denying death can drive people to make significant accomplishments. Cultural beliefs that help people handle death anxiety can also encourage collaboration, creativity, and success. Chasing self-esteem might lead to pursuing excellence. Issues arise when denying death results in negative outcomes like prejudice, violence, environmental harm, or denial of evidence. The theory suggests that understanding how death thoughts influence us might lead to better decision-making. If you realize harsh judgments of others are partly fueled by fear of death rather than a pure moral viewpoint, you might be less harsh in your assessments. If you notice that your constant busyness is partly an escape from existential questions, you might slow down and rethink your priorities. If you recognize that some beliefs ease anxiety more than reflect truth, you might hold those beliefs less tightly. Can we consciously bring these hidden motivations to light? Researchers say it's challenging because death denial works quietly to protect us. Becoming aware of these thoughts might weaken that protection. This creates a paradox. As you become more aware of how death fear influences you, you might need new ways to cope. Some experts think the goal isn't to eliminate death fear. It might not even be possible, but to deal with it healthily. Rather than denying or battling death, we could aim for what's known as mature death acceptance. This involves confronting mortality while finding meaning without clinging to a worldview or demeaning others. Mature acceptance might draw from philosophies like Stoicism or Buddhism, which emphasize accepting impermanence. It could mean finding fulfillment in living well now rather than creating a legacy, getting satisfaction from helping others rather than chasing personal achievements, and seeing cultural beliefs as constructed stories rather than absolute truths. Positive approaches to thinking about death suggest reflecting on mortality can be beneficial. Structured contemplation of death that emphasizes gratitude, connection, or transcendence often leaves people more generous, content with life, and prompts psychological growth. The key is seeing awareness of death not as a threat, but as an encouragement to embrace life fully and with kindness. Terror management. Theory paints a rather stark picture of what drives us as humans. We're not quite as logical or high-minded as we'd like to believe. Instead, a lot of what we do is fueled by unconscious defenses. Some of the most amazing things we've created, along with some terrible deeds, come from the same place, our fear of dying and a burning desire to conquer it. This doesn't mean we're awful, but it does suggest we're easy to manipulate and prone to destructive behavior when faced with mortality. Getting a grip on terror management sheds some light on how our actions can be swayed by dread of death, and how leaders or movements leverage that fear to push political agendas. Fear tactics work by awakening death-related worries, which make us more defensive and inflexible. Seeing this pattern helps us tackle fabricated threats more reasonably. The theory also highlights the impact of societal death perceptions on communities as a whole. Cultures that deal with death openly and have healthy mortality rituals might produce kinder, less violent individuals. In contrast, cultures that dismiss death and act invincible could end up with anxious and combative people when their beliefs get tested. Both terror management theory and Heidegger's existential probe agree that death awareness shapes our lives profoundly. They split when it comes to focus. Heidegger felt that accepting death candidly is liberating and can make us more individualistic, while terror management theory suggests that it stirs anxiety, leading to conformity and clinging to worldviews. Maybe both views hit the mark. Death awareness can either set us free or scare us stiff, depending on whether we confront it thoughtfully and consciously, or react defensively and without reflection. Part 4. The Symmetry Dilemma: Why We Fear Death, but Not the Time Before We Were Born. There's an age-old question in philosophy about why we see time as unbalanced. Death is often seen as a bad thing, even tragic, especially if it happens prematurely. But coming into the world later than one could have is not considered just as unfortunate. This seems a bit contradictory. After all, both death and late arrival in life mean we miss out on time living. If you made your entrance into the world a decade earlier, you'd have had 10 additional years of life. Similarly, if you lived 10 years longer than expected, that's 10 more years too. So why do we fret over one loss but not the other? This conundrum dates back to the Roman poet Lucretius, a follower of Epicurus. Lucretius argued that if it's death's removal of future life that bothers us, then not being born earlier should trouble us too, as it denies us past life. He noted that the time before we're born is like the time after we die. In both, we simply don't exist. If endless time before our birth doesn't concern us, then endless time after death shouldn't either. It's a tidy, logical perspective. Consider Alice and Betty. Alice is born in 2000 and passes away in 2025 at the age of 25. Betty, on the other hand, is born in 1990 and lives until 2040, reaching 50 years old. Betty has 25 more years of life than Alice. This scenario can be viewed two ways. Betty lives longer post-birth and has 25 extra years. Or Alice is born 25 years later and misses out on those years before death. Both highlight Betty's longer lifespan compared to Alice. Yet, emotionally, we react differently. We see Betty as having more luck because she lives to 50, while Alice only gets to 25, and we label Alice's early death as tragic. But we don't pity Alice for being born in 2000 instead of 1990 like Betty. We don't think her birth year is a tragedy. But both situations show a 25-year loss. Or imagine someone dies at 70. Picture two alternative scenarios. In one, they live to 80, so they've got 10 extra years at life's end. In the other, they're born 10 years earlier, adding 10 more years to life's start. Both scenarios result in 80 years of life instead of 70, yet we focus more on living longer than on being born earlier. This imbalance challenges the notion that death's badness is due to missed opportunities. If death is regrettable because it deprives us of times we could have enjoyed, then being born late should be regrettable for the same reason. Both restrict our lifespan compared to what might have been, yet we care much more about one than the other, implying our fear of death isn't only about what's lost, but relies on something else that sidesteps the loss strategy. Philosophers have offered different explanations for this imbalance. One idea is to reject the imbalance and claim that being born late truly is unfortunate. Fred Feldman supports this view, suggesting that if being born earlier would have improved your life, then your actual timing of birth does indeed limit you and is somewhat unlucky. It's just that we don't focus on this loss because we don't have desires or regrets about not existing earlier. This approach maintains the logic of the loss concept, but feels counterintuitive to most people. It implies that everyone faces one of the greatest misfortunes possible. Each of us could have had a longer life if born earlier. This means everyone gets shortchanged of infinite past potential life. It seems to make the idea of misfortune lose its significance. If everyone encounters such a huge deprivation, then the notion loses real impact. A more popular perspective highlights how our future demands our attention in ways that the potential past doesn't. We craft plans, shoot for goals, build connections, and hone our skills, always with an eye toward what's ahead. But death kind of derails all those future-focused efforts. It halts projects that aren't done, relationships that are still growing, and plans that haven't been realized. Being born later doesn't upset thoughts about things behind us, because we don't plan for the times before we existed. Philosophers Anthony Bruckner and John Martin Fisher have really dug into this idea. They suggest we care more about what's coming than what we could have had in the past. And honestly, it's not unreasonable. It matches how we live and think. We can mold the future, not change the past. Our emotions are tied to what's coming up next, not what might have been before we were around. Death threatens what we've invested in, our future, whereas being born late doesn't mess with things we value. Some critics say this just describes our mindset without really explaining why it's like that. Maybe our focus on the future is baseless or random. Does when we miss out on something really determine how bad it is for us? If losing something good makes death suck, the timing shouldn't matter. Just because we care more about missing out on future stuff than stuff we never had doesn't mean future losses are actually worse. Derek Parfit famously argued that leaning towards the future doesn't make much sense. Picture this. You're in a hospital. The doctor tells you either you went through an hour-long painful surgery yesterday with no anesthetic, but won't remember it because of a drug, or you're set for a much shorter, less painful one tomorrow with some anesthetic. What would you rather? Many strongly feel the pain should be in the past, even though it means more pain happened. This suggests we might focus more on lesser harm in the future than on greater past suffering. Still, maybe this bias makes some sense. The flow of time might matter a lot. Some philosophers argue the future is open, unlike the past, with new chances. The past is set, while the future is full of possibilities. If that's true, death cuts off real options, but being born late doesn't steal what's truly possible. This idea hinges on debatable views about time and possibility that not everyone buys into. Another take views prenatal and posthumous non-existence differently. Before you're around, there's no you missing out on anything. But once you're here, you can gain and lose. Death removes potential future gains from someone already living. Being born late doesn't yank past goodies away because there was no you to lose them before birth. Critics note that in death, there's no one left to feel the loss either. When you die, you're gone. There's no you to miss out anymore. So why does this difference keep existing? If death can harm you after you're gone, logically, being born late could harm you before you existed. Maybe it's not just about existence, but identity over time. Once you exist, it's clear who you are and the life you might have led. Death slices this potential short. Before you're here, there's no specific scenario for when you should have shown up. There are countless possible earlier starts, all equally non-special. So, while death steals a clear future, being born late doesn't snatch away any specific past. This idea has some logic, but also faces hurdles. If we can imagine different times of dying, why not different times of being born? Both involve thinking about a world where your timeline shifts. The core situation feels quite the same. Another viewpoint considers life stories. A human life naturally shapes up with a beginning, middle, and end. When life ends suddenly, it leaves loose ends, missed chances, and broken ties. And it just doesn't fit with how we picture life going. But arriving later doesn't shake up the regular flow of life. Your life still begins at a definite moment. It just starts when it does. There's no tug of feeling incomplete for not having an earlier start that seems like the ideal beginning of your story. This idea shines a light on how we view time and the unfolding of life, though it might simply reflect our instincts without offering any solid justification. Why should the way a story plays out hold moral significance? If reaching life's well-being peak is the goal, then the story elements might seem pointless. The issue where time works differently connects with bigger questions about what makes us who we are and what genuinely matters for our survival. When we think about wanting more time to live, what do we actually mean? Are we worried about our future selves existing? Those future versions of us are going to be quite different, with changes in memories, beliefs, and even appearance. So how can they still be us? Maybe it's not perfect identity that matters, but rather the ongoing psychological connection. We care about the future since we'll be tied to that future self by a string of memories, intentions, and qualities. This mental link is why we're so focused on the future instead of a longer past. We aren't psychically linked to past selves we didn't turn into by being born earlier, but we are linked to the future self we might become. But this triggers more questions. If psychological continuity is key, shouldn't we stress less about our far-off future compared to the near one, since those links weaken over time? The person you'll become at 80 is quite different from who you are at 30. Still, we see living until 80 as more significant than just reaching 35. Gaining those additional 45 years holds great importance, even if you mentally change a lot. Some thinkers believe we've got to accept this imbalance as a basic part of human nature. We naturally favor the future over the past. It's not irrational. It's simply part of how we work, being beings who plan and move forward. This future-focused nature is as foundational to us as our social and rational characteristics. Seeking deeper explanations might be like figuring out why we care more about ourselves than others. At some point, you hit a fundamental human truth that doesn't need more reasoning. Though this view is straightforward, it might give up too soon. Philosophy aims to figure out why we make specific choices. Just admitting our penchant for valuing the future more without exploring further strays away from understanding our core motivations. The imbalance in time's perception also affects real-life decisions, like what we think about life-extending tech. If living longer is valuable, then working on ways to extend life seems worthwhile. But if it's just about the amount of time alive, we might just start having kids earlier to get more lived years, skipping the need for life extension. This leaning toward preserving life hints that our true value lies more in continuing a personal journey, keeping projects on track, and maintaining bonds rather than merely counting up years. What makes death tough isn't just less goodness, but cutting off life in progress. Starting life later doesn't disturb this because it doesn't halt anything by not beginning sooner. This uneven view of time also affects end-of-life choices. If people faced whether to die now or get one more year with pain, many would choose that extra year, especially to have closure or maintain relationships. On the flip side, deciding between never being born or existing just to suffer for a year, most would prefer never to have existed. It seems like the idea of future pain carries more significance for us than the pain we've already been through. This tricky issue connected to time might never get fully resolved because it touches on the basic ways we experience time and make choices. We live in the now, remember the past, and plan for what's next. This way of interacting with time is so fundamental to us that it naturally affects how we evaluate situations. Even if this imbalance can't be completely explained, it's crucial to recognize it. It shows that our fears about dying aren't just about losing things we value in a general sense. Time's passage is a big factor, and our place within it really matters. Death hits hard not just because life ends, but because it breaks the chain of experiences we're living through. Lucretius's question still challenges the idea that the harm from death is purely about loss. Any strong theory about why death is bad needs to explore why we're so concerned with when we die, not so much with when we were born. The most compelling explanations draw from human psychology, our decision-making processes, and our natural way of looking at time. Whether these insights fully explain or just hint at this imbalance is still a topic of discussion. Part 5. The immortality question. Is living forever really a good idea? Most people would leap at the chance to live forever without a second guess. Death is often seen as the enemy we need to defeat. If we discovered how to overcome it, we'd be cracking humanity's toughest problem. But is that really the case? There's an engaging philosophical discussion that argues immortality might be more of a burden than death, making eternal life more of a curse than a blessing. This surprising view, mainly advocated by philosopher Bernard Williams, pushes us to rethink our fundamental beliefs about the importance of living and dying. Williams bases his argument on a story from the opera The Macropoulos Case by Leos Janáček, a Czech composer. The main character, Elena Macropoulos, drinks a potion at 42 that stops her from aging. Now 342 years old, she's far from happy. She's bored, feels detached, and life no longer captivates her. When offered another dose of the potion, she declines, choosing death instead. Williams uses her story to make the case that immortality would ultimately be unendurable. He splits his argument into two parts. First, for life to feel worthwhile, it needs to involve goals, projects, and desires that keep you going. Williams calls these categorical desires, and they're the driving forces that give you a reason to live so you can fulfill them. These might be writing a book, seeing your children grow up, learning a new language, or traveling to Japan. These desires make the future appealing because achieving them requires you to stick around. Categorical desires can be unique experiences or things you repeat. Unique ones might include climbing Mount Everest, writing your autobiography, or mending things with an old friend. Repeatable desires include enjoying good food, listening to music, or spending time with loved ones, all things you can relive multiple times. The catch is that unique desires eventually run out. After 300 years, you might feel like you've done everything you ever wanted, maybe more than once. Williams argues that even repeatable desires lose their charm after endless repetition. Imagine your favorite food. Now think about eating it every day for a year, then for 10 years, then over a century. Eventually, even the most delicious meal would become dull. This goes for all repeatable pleasures, whether it's sex, conversation, art, or nature. They're delightful in moderation, but potentially unbearable if they continue without end. People easily get bored. Things initially exciting can become routine. What used to be meaningful can feel empty. The second part of Williams' argument focuses on personal identity. For eternal life to appeal, it has to really be you continuing, not just someone else in your body. But what keeps you the same person over time? It's a mix of your character, memories, values, and personality, which evolve over time. The you from 300 years hence might not resemble you now. Your memories, values, personality, or interests may have changed. Williams argues that if your character shifts enough, then the immortal version of you isn't really you in any true sense. Your existing self, with specific projects and connections, essentially fades away slowly as you're slowly replaced by another version. If your character stays unchanged, you're stuck, unable to grow. Without change, life feels stagnant, trapping you in a never-ending present. So, you have a challenging decision. Either immortality involves enough change that your identity isn't preserved so you don't truly endure, or there's insufficient change, leaving you mentally immobile. Neither situation is genuinely attractive. From this view, death isn't just bearable, it's necessary. It's the fact that our time is limited that gives life structure, meaning, and urgency. However, philosopher Thomas Nagel presents the opposing view that death is always a loss, regardless of when it comes, and with the right perspective, immortality could be worthwhile. Nagel thinks Williams has a limited view when considering what might motivate an immortal being. Williams seems to think eternal life would just be an endless version of our current life. But why assume that? An immortal could pick up new skills, find new sources of happiness, and tackle endless, intricate projects. Take fields like math and philosophy. There's always more to explore. An immortal could immerse themselves in these without burnout. When it comes to relationships, an immortal being might create significant connections with every new generation, each unique. As for creativity, imagine an artist spending centuries perfecting a single work, reaching heights of perfection that mortal artists couldn't even imagine. Nagel admits that some positives are related to our limited time here, like the drive and passion from knowing life is short. Still, he also sees perks to immortality: the freedom to finish projects without rushing, acquiring wisdom beyond mortal capacity, and witnessing the grand arc of history unfold. These things are unique to immortality. Plus, Nagel questions whether eternal life would inevitably be boring. Williams envisions immortality as simply stretching out our present experience. But it's hard to foresee what infinite life would be like based solely on our short lives. Maybe creatures designed for immortality wouldn't experience boredom the way we do. Perhaps, after centuries, you'd enter a mental state beyond our current understanding. This argument has led to rich philosophical discussions exploring different scenarios. Some philosophers make distinctions among types of immortality. There's unending life, but also immortality with eternal youth, perfect health, and infinite resources. What if you could choose to end your life whenever you wished, without being forced to? What if everyone was immortal versus just you? The allure of immortality likely depends on the scenario. Being a lonely, frail immortal in a dying universe sounds grim, but being forever healthy, surrounded by friends in a constantly renewing infinite universe, sounds wonderful. The real question is not just whether immortality is desirable, but which form of it and under what conditions it would be. Some philosophers suggest the real issue isn't about choosing between immortality and mortality, but about life's meaning and value. Whether life is short or never-ending, does it hold enough significance to be worth living? A short life could be filled with meaning, while a never-ending life might feel empty. Or it could be the opposite. It's not the lifespan that determines value. This connects to ideas about narrative. Mortal lives have a storyline, a beginning, middle, and end, providing structure with development, climax, and resolution. An immortal life doesn't have this narrative arc. It's a sequence of separate episodes. Some think this lack of narrative makes immortality feel pointless, as it misses out on a unified story. Others argue episodic living has its own worth, and perhaps we overrate narrative unity due to our mortal limits. There are practical implications too. If technology arose that could dramatically increase lifespans or offer immortality, should we use it? Part of this depends on whether an extended life would be appealing. But there are social and ethical considerations as well. Universal immortality could lead to overwhelming population and resource issues. If only a select few could achieve immortality, it would create massive inequality, with the rich buying eternal life and the poor remaining mortal, which seems ethically troublesome. There is also the danger of societal stagnation. New generations bring fresh perspectives, challenge the status quo, and drive innovation. Without death, societal change might slow, with those in power potentially holding on to it indefinitely. Mortality allows for renewal and evolution. Proponents of life extension argue that death shouldn't be the tool to solve social problems. If issues like inequality or stagnation exist, those need to be addressed through improved social policies. Letting people die to make space or to drive progress isn't the answer. Most life extension theories don't promise true immortality. They aim to lengthen the period of good health, maybe allowing someone to live to 150 instead of 75. The fear of endless boredom doesn't really concern lives that are just significantly longer. However, Williams' argument could still be relevant for lengthy lives. For instance, reaching 300 years old might mean exhausting your genuine desires. His point isn't about actual immortality, but about having a life so long that boredom and a lack of meaning become issues. We're not sure where that point is exactly. Would living 200 years feel too long? Or what about 500? It might vary from person to person. There's a perspective that's not often considered, how your desire to live might change over your lifetime. In your younger and middle years, with many goals and relationships, living longer seems appealing. But once you reach old age, having accomplished most major goals and lost many loved ones, you might feel ready to go, not from grief, but from a sense of completion. You've lived and experienced life fully, and continuing might not add much more. So maybe the best approach isn't about setting a fixed lifespan or achieving immortality, but having a choice. You could continue living as long as life remains meaningful, or decide to end it when you're truly ready. Some refer to this as conditional immortality, where you have the option to live indefinitely, but can choose to end it when you want. You wouldn't be forced into living or dying against your will, though this concept has its own complications. Opting for death assumes you won't find future life worthwhile. But how can you be certain? 100 more years could bring unimagined joys or purposes. Choosing death could mean closing doors to paths you haven't explored yet. The decision could be influenced by things like societal pressure, depression, or temporary despair that might pass if you wait. Talking about immortality highlights what really matters to us in life. If it's about experiences and joys, then endless life sounds appealing as long as the good times continue. If it's about relationships, eternal life with loved ones would be ideal, but doing so alone would be tragic. If it's about achievements and meaning, then an endless life only matters if it offers meaningful possibilities. Williams's view suggests that what we really value isn't just existence, but a life with an end point. The pressures, passions, and meanings brought about by anticipating the end of life aren't just small perks we could transfer to an endless life. They're tightly connected to being mortal. An immortal being trying to hold on to a human perspective of life might be deceiving itself. True immortality would call for a completely new way of experiencing existence, possibly for better or worse, but definitely different from the life we know. Some philosophers, drawing from Buddhism, believe the desire for eternal life is the root problem, seeing it as a sign of craving, the source of suffering. Instead of stretching life out indefinitely, we should find peace with its temporary nature. This viewpoint suggests that avoiding death might actually prevent us from living well now. Real wisdom is accepting mortality instead of battling it. On the other hand, some inspired by Nietzsche propose eternal recurrence as a test to affirm life. If you'd gladly relive your life in exactly the same way, over and over, it's considered a life well lived. This isn't suggesting time literally repeats, but rather a way to evaluate life's worth. Would your life still hold meaning if it cycled back on itself forever? Debates about immortality are unlikely to have a clear-cut resolution. It comes down to things that can't be decisively answered and value judgments open to various interpretations. We don't really know what an endless existence would feel like at its core. We aren't sure if inevitable boredom could be overcome. We don't know whether we'd still recognize ourselves after millions of years. Even when we have this info, people still can't agree on what makes life truly valuable. This ongoing debate highlights just how tangled our feelings about death really are. We dread death because life is precious to us, but it might be that death is what makes life meaningful in the first place. This tricky contradiction, where our fears and values are connected, suggests there's a deeper link between death and life's meaning than we often admit. Maybe it's not despite life ending, but because of it, that life finds its meaning. On a practical level, it reminds us to approach the idea of living longer with humility. We shouldn't just jump to the conclusion that a longer life is automatically better, or that living forever would be the ultimate goal. At the same time, we shouldn't see death as inherently positive or necessary without careful consideration. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Life is definitely precious, but maybe not endlessly so. Death is unfortunate, but perhaps it's not the worst thing that could happen. The ideal length of life might be longer than what we have now, but not endlessly so, long enough to achieve great things, but not so long that living becomes unbearable. Both Williams and Nagel point out that death is a serious philosophical conundrum. Williams thinks mortality is crucial for meaning, while Nagel sees it as consistently unfortunate. Yet, both recognize its deep importance. Our thoughts on death's value shape our ideas on the meaning of life, influence our medical goals, guide how we spend resources, and shape the future we hope to build. Whether living forever would be a good thing is still up in the air, but thinking about it helps us understand what we actually value about life. Part 6. Death and Meaning. Does mortality make life matter? One of the big questions about death is how it affects our sense of purpose. Does knowing we're going to die give our lives deeper meaning? Or does it make everything seem pointless instead? People are really split on this topic. Some argue that having a limited lifespan makes our actions more meaningful, while others believe that a life with an end date actually strips away significance. These differing views highlight a fundamental split in opinions on what gives life meaning and where that meaning originates. The idea that life's meaning stems from its limits argues that death doesn't just align with a meaningful life, it's crucial for it. Without death, life would lose the urgency, vibrancy, and structure needed for meaningful activities. Think about deadlines for a moment. Literally, the term itself suggests an endpoint. We need deadlines because without them, tasks could be pushed off indefinitely. The ticking clock pressures us to set priorities, focus our energies, and take immediate action. If there's no deadline, motivation wanes. Life inherently gives us a deadline. Our limited time pushes us to make the most of it. If you believed you'd live forever, why bother reading this today instead of postponing for a century? Why have that difficult conversation now instead of pushing it off endlessly? Why strive for any accomplishment with infinite time at your disposal? Time scarcity makes it valuable. Each moment matters because moments aren't infinite. This sense of urgency isn't just about ticking clocks. It shapes how our life story unfolds. A life with a start, middle, and finish creates its own narrative arc. Choices gain weight because they close other doors. You can't do it all, so your choices reveal who you truly are. Commitment holds weight because it means sacrificing other options. Deep love becomes significant because the shared time is limited. Endless time with unlimited people would make each connection seem trivial. Philosopher Samuel Scheffler suggests that mortality adds depth to our lives by connecting us to future generations. We care about legacy, about things that last longer than us. We invest in our children, create enduring art, and build institutions that outlive us. These projects matter precisely because we won't see them come to full fruition. We're part of a future beyond our own experience. Such selfless acts are made possible by the knowledge of our mortality. Moreover, accepting death's reality intensifies the stakes of our existence. Our decisions carry weight because they mold our one and only life. There's no do-over, no second chances to make alternate choices. This permanence gives choices significance. A wrong career choice can cost us irreplaceable time. A broken relationship might remain unresolved because life doesn't promise extra time to mend it. This all-or-nothing scenario adds a seriousness to life that wouldn't exist if retries were an option. Death allows for tragedy, and tragedy is essential to how we find meaning. The risk of losing good lives too soon, the possibility of dreams going unfulfilled, and the endings relationships face due to death bring poignancy and depth. A world without tragedy wouldn't have real jeopardy, genuine loss, or the bravery involved in facing life's end. Then again, some argue that mortality robs life of meaning. This view has been around forever. If everything ends in death, if our achievements are destined to be forgotten, and if the universe is headed for heat, death where nothing we do will leave a lasting impact, then what's the point? From this grand view, our efforts feel pointless. We build sandcastles only to see the waves wash them away. This viewpoint comes with many subtleties, but the core belief is that true value requires permanence. However, death makes sure nothing lasts forever. You will die. So will everyone you love. Humanity might vanish. The sun will fade out. The universe might cool to its ultimate state. From an eternal stance, human life is fleetingly short, and our achievements barely register. How can anything have real significance when faced with this vast emptiness? This is often termed the futility argument. No matter what heights you reach, death has a way of making everything feel pointless. You might craft an incredible book, but eventually those copies will fade away, and it'll be forgotten. You love your kids dearly, yet one day they'll be gone too, and your family line might end. You might add to human knowledge, but humanity could forget or disappear entirely. Everything humans strive for eventually fades away into obscurity. The typical reaction to this idea revolves around the difference between meanings that come from within and those that are imposed by the universe. The universe itself doesn't care about objective meaning. It doesn't hold anything as important. Subjective meaning, though, is about the significance we find in our life projects and values. The argument that life's a waste suggests only objective meaning truly counts. But maybe that's not quite right. Things can matter to us, even if they don't hold cosmic importance. Your connection with your child is incredibly important to you both, even if it doesn't mean anything to distant galaxies. What you do holds value if it aligns with your personal objectives, even if they're forgotten down the road. Meaning doesn't have to be eternal or universally important. It just needs to relate to activities and relationships that we find worthwhile while we're living. However, this approach risks being brushed off as merely subjective. If meaning is what we personally care about, then it's arbitrary. Serial killers might care about murder. Does that mean it's meaningful to them? If meaning is just about what we care about, then anything goes, making the idea lose its depth. We want to think some lives hold more meaning, some activities are truly valuable. Maybe genuine meaning involves engaging in things of intrinsic value, like art, knowledge, human connection, or alleviating suffering, things that have inherent worth, even if no one acknowledges them. Living a meaningful life means focusing on these valuable pursuits. Mortality doesn't diminish this because things have worth during our involvement with them, regardless of what comes after. But claiming something has objective value is tricky. Where do objective values actually come from? They aren't from God if you're secular, and nature doesn't care about values. Maybe they're rooted in human nature or rational thought, but that's up for debate. Without firm grounding for objective value, depending on it doesn't really fix the problem. Another angle asks why something needs to last forever to be genuinely meaningful. Think about enjoying a delicious meal that's gone once eaten. Its temporary nature doesn't negate the pleasure. You have a great conversation that eventually ends. Just because it wraps up doesn't erase its value. Present joys don't need to be permanent to matter. Something can mean a lot to us now, even if it doesn't last forever. This exposes a flaw in the argument about life's futility, which looks at life's meaning from a timeless perspective. But meaning is experienced in the moment by people living in time. In our world, things matter, and whether they matter from an eternal point doesn't matter, because we don't live in a timeless world. Thomas Nagel points out that life feels absurd due to the conflict between our ability to comprehend and our recognition of our limitations. We passionately care about things we know, in the grand scheme, aren't important. We chase after dreams, knowing death might make them seem pointless. This contradiction creates absurdity. We can't help caring about things we know aren't all that significant. Nagel suggests that, instead of feeling despondent, we should adopt a sense of irony. We should dive into our projects while understanding their cosmic triviality. Balancing both views allows us to live earnestly without becoming overly serious, so setbacks aren't devastating. But some critics think this could lead to emotional instability. Can you truly commit to something if you believe it doesn't really matter? Doesn't the concept that nothing truly matters make real dedication hard to achieve? Maybe Nagel's theory sounds good on paper, but is tough to apply in real life. Most people struggle to balance the two viewpoints he describes. They usually either immerse themselves entirely in their pursuits, brushing off any pointlessness, or get bogged down by the thought that it's all pointless. Another take is to focus on enjoying the moment instead of stressing about the big picture or how you'll be remembered. What if meaning isn't found in major accomplishments or long-lasting achievements, but in what's happening right now? The magic of a sunset is all about the moment. A genuine connection with someone is meaningful in the here and now. The experience you're having in this very moment is what truly counts, regardless of past or future events. This perspective, which is influenced by Buddhism, suggests we miss the point if we're always chasing big achievements or worrying about what's ahead. Real meaning comes from being fully present, maintaining awareness, and ensuring quality in our experiences. Death doesn't negate this because every moment holds its own value. Whether you have just a day or 1,000,000 years, it boils down to the quality of your present experiences. Despite its appeal, this approach has its downsides. It doesn't fully account for why we're drawn to goals, long-term projects, and enduring relationships. If only the present matters, why should you finish writing that book? Is working on the final chapters any more rewarding than stopping now? Yet, we do care about completing projects and sticking with commitments over time. Simply emphasizing the present seems to miss a vital part of how we find meaning. Maybe meaningfulness requires considering both the present and the future. A fulfilling life combines the richness of each moment with the pursuit of important goals across time. Death might threaten the latter, but not the former. Mortality challenges meaning by disrupting the completion of long-haul goals, but doesn't erase meaning since being present still counts for a lot. Some philosophers suggest we find meaning by connecting with something larger than ourselves. True meaning stems from contributing to something beyond our own lives, whether that's community, humanity, or abstract ideals like truth or beauty. Under this view, living solely for yourself lacks any genuine sense of meaning, no matter how enjoyable it might seem. To find true significance, you must link up with something external. But mortality makes this complex. If you do make a larger contribution, maybe it outlasts you. The institutions you help create, the discoveries you make, and the people you influence might continue past your own lifetime. In this way, death doesn't negate meaning. Instead, it offers a kind of transcendence. You live on through the changes you've initiated in the world. However, this assumes your impact will really last. For most, their impacts quickly fade. A few generations on and people forget. Your efforts blend into the endless stream of history without personal recognition. Does being forgotten reduce the value of your actions? If meaning hinges on your lasting impact, and most impacts don't last, does that mean most lives lack meaning? That's kind of hard to accept. It implies only those with historical stature, like renowned artists, scientists, or leaders, actually achieve meaning. But that doesn't sit right. A parent nurturing their kids with love finds meaning, even if history doesn't remember them. A teacher inspiring students creates meaning, even if that inspiration fizzles out over generations. Small acts of kindness and creation have value, even without lasting impact. Maybe the trouble is thinking too much about legacy. Meaning is about how you live, not whether you're remembered. A life focused on meaningful activities and relationships is full of meaning, regardless of fame or lasting influence. What's crucial isn't achieving immortality through a legacy, but living well while you're here. Yet we still care about being remembered and leaving a mark. The thought of being completely forgotten upsets a lot of people. Why do we get so worked up about disappearing into nothingness if living well gives life more meaning than being remembered by others? Maybe it's because we secretly believe that meaning needs to last, and when a life is completely forgotten, it feels like it loses its value. The link between death and meaning might actually depend on how we look at time. In the short run, knowing life ends makes us super focused and urgent. In the medium view, dying before achieving our dreams feels like a threat to meaning. And from a long-term angle, being forgotten can make everything seem pointless. Looking through different time lenses leads us to different ideas about whether facing death adds or takes away from life's meaning. Different cultures and religions throughout history have tackled these tricky questions in their own ways. Religions that have a God often suggest that life goes on forever and has cosmic significance from God's point of view. In this sense, your life matters endlessly because God values it, making death just a shift to an eternal state where meaning stays intact. This is comforting for believers, but these religious ideas can be pretty controversial. Then, there are existentialists who don't go for the cosmic purpose thing. They say, we need to make our own meaning through personal choices and commitment. As Sartre said, we have the freedom to choose our paths without anyone giving us ultimate reasons. This can be anxiety-inducing, but also makes us truly responsible, since we can't blame God or society for our choices. The Stoics propose coming to terms with mortality as just part of the natural order, telling us to focus on what we can actually manage. While we can't control when we die, we can decide how we live until then. Meaning, for them, comes from living a life of reason and virtue. To them, death isn't good or bad. It's just a natural event, and being afraid of it only wastes energy better spent on living fully. Meanwhile, many Eastern philosophies teach that impermanence is the essence of reality. Everything comes and goes, and clinging to permanence just brings suffering, while embracing change brings peace. In this view, death doesn't ruin life's meaning. It's our quest for permanence that keeps us from enjoying life's fleeting beauty. Modern thinkers like Alasdair MacIntyre have wondered if living a meaningful life requires having a continuous story. He thinks our lives are more understandable as stories, where meaning comes from keeping a narrative going. Death, he says, gives the story its final chapter, making life's narrative hang together. But some argue not all meaningful lives need this consistent narrative. A life can be full of meaning, even if it's made up of random moments or different phases, with people reinventing themselves over and over. In the end, whether death adds or takes away from meaning doesn't have a simple answer, because what meaning is complicated. There are different kinds of meaning, whether they are experiential, narrative, relational, goal-oriented, or cosmic, and these are all affected by mortality in their own ways. While death can disrupt a life story or stop us from reaching goals, it doesn't have to take away from the richness of personal experiences or relationships. Even though it wipes out cosmic permanence, it doesn't cancel out more human-scaled significance. How you think death affects meaning probably depends on which type of meaning matters most to you. If you value cosmic importance and permanence, mortality feels really tough. If you care about immediate experiences and relationships, the fact that life is short isn't as scary. If you focus on achieving personal milestones, then the effect of mortality hinges on whether you reach them. Most folks likely mix these perspectives, valuing both the immediate and the lasting, close connections, and a wider significance. This creates a tension between different sources of meaning, each with its time dimension. It might be wise to accept this complexity instead of looking for an easy answer. Death can seriously mess with how we perceive meaning. It cuts things short, brings that whole everything must end vibe, and limits our experiences and accomplishments. But on the other hand, death also sparks urgency, pushes us to make sacrifices, deepens our stories, and makes our choices more significant. Truly living well isn't about tying up these contradictions neatly. It's about finding balance within them. How death shapes meaning is deeply linked to our views on what makes life worthwhile. If you're focused on achieving things that endure, mortality's the big bad wolf knocking at your door. But life's not as daunting if you're all about living in the moment. And if you're on a quest for some cosmic significance, death seems like a bigger threat than if you're simply seeking deep connections with people. Ultimately, whether death disrupts meaning or not hinges on how you initially perceive life's meaning. Part 7. Philosophical takes on Stoicism, accepting mortality, and embracing the art of dying. Beyond debating if death harms us or makes life lose its meaning, philosophy provides helpful perspectives on dealing with mortality. These ideas aren't about dry theories. They're meant to transform our emotional and practical approach to death. It's not about proving death harmless, but about living well, knowing our time is limited. Ancient schools like Stoicism stressed death in their teachings. Stoics argued that fearing death is irrational and that understanding it can dispel those fears. They combined ideas about death's nature with practical ways to ease the anxiety it brings. They taught differentiating between what's in our control and what isn't. Since death is beyond our control, fearing it is a waste of energy. Instead, focus on managing our thoughts, values, and reactions. Death is neither good nor bad. It's neutral. What truly matters is our response to it. Epictetus, once a slave and a Stoic philosopher, suggested daily reflection on mortality. Start the day knowing everyone, including loved ones, will eventually die. This isn't morbid, it's honest. By accepting life's briefness, we prepare for inevitable loss. When death comes, there's no shock because acceptance is already in place. Marcus Aurelius, who was both a Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, frequently wrote about death in his personal diaries. He often pondered death's naturalness, the countless who've died before him, and his own temporary existence that will eventually dissolve. This broad perspective helps diminish the personal threat of death. No one is spared. It's a part of nature's cycle. They also noted that fearing death steals time from the present. Seneca pointed out how our minds suffer more from imagined fears than from reality. Most fears about death never happen. We often envision terrifying situations that never come to be. And when death does arrive, we won't suffer, since we'll no longer exist. Thus, fearing death seems unreasonable. It creates present stress over something that won't distress us later. Stoic strategies to ease death-related anxiety include negative visualization. Imagining losing treasured things, health, loved ones, or possessions has benefits. It prepares you for loss, enhancing gratitude by showing life's fragility and making you less attached to uncontrollable external things. However, not everyone buys into Stoicism. First off, can the fear of death be eradicated just by logical thinking? The Stoics believed emotions follow judgments. Understanding death's neutrality should erase fear. But modern psychology suggests emotions aren't so easily directed. You might know flying is safe, yet still feel scared during turbulence. Recognizing death as natural doesn't always erase the fear. Secondly, is erasing the fear of death even good? Fear drives caution, promotes healthy choices, and steers us clear of risks. Losing it entirely might lead to reckless behavior. Perhaps mild death anxiety is useful, with only extreme cases being problematic. Thirdly, the Stoic approach might hinder emotional richness. Constant awareness of life's transience and potential loss could curb your ability to love deeply and care greatly. Stoics claim that true love can coexist with accepting life's impermanence. But some critics see their calmness as mere emotional numbness disguised as wisdom. Lastly, Stoicism might better suit those in privileged positions facing natural mortality rather than those experiencing violence or injustice. As a Roman emperor nearing life's end because of illness, it might be reasonable to see death as a natural part of life. But in a different scenario, like being a slave facing execution or a child with a preventable disease, accepting death might feel unjust, like giving up on fairness. Stoicism's idea to embrace death as it comes could sometimes be an excuse not to fight preventable deaths. But Stoicism does have some good advice. Learning to tell apart what we can control from what we can't is still useful. Worrying about eventual death just wastes the time we have now. A bit of acceptance is crucial for our mental well-being. And Stoicism makes a good point about focusing on our reactions instead of trying to control everything around us. Buddhism has a different view on death, but, like Stoicism, values acceptance. According to Buddhist teachings, everything we go through is temporary. Holding on to things as if they were permanent leads to unhappiness. Accepting the temporary nature of all things brings peace and balance. Death is not an enemy, it's a teacher, reminding us that everything is temporary. In Buddhism, contemplating death and decay is part of the practice. Some monks even meditate near bodies that are decomposing, directly confronting mortality. The goal isn't to get obsessed with death, but to see through the false idea of permanence. Our bodies are continually dying in small ways. Our cells are constantly dying and being replaced. The line between life and death is more blurred than definite. This meditation aims to reduce our sense of self. Buddhism teaches that clinging to the self leads to suffering. If you look closely, there's no permanent self, just a flow of experiences and thoughts. Death is simply where this flow stops. There wasn't an eternal self to start with, and realizing this can free us from the fear of dying. Buddhism also says death isn't the opposite of life, but the opposite of birth. Life includes both birth and death as part of its cycle. To fear death but not birth shows a misunderstanding. Each is just a shift, a temporary phase that comes and goes. Some Buddhist groups believe in rebirth, but not in the sense of an unchanging soul. Instead, consciousness continues in a new form. For others, rebirth is more about how we change with every new moment, each thought coming and going. Buddhism's perspective offers mental health benefits. Studies suggest Buddhists are less anxious about death and more comfortable with it. Their practices seem to reduce existential fear. The philosophy helps make sense of death and eases its fear. Still, Buddhism faces challenges. First, is denying the self beneficial for our mental health? Western culture often emphasizes self-esteem and strong identity. Buddhism's idea of the self as an illusion to be surpassed might conflict with this. Maybe the Buddhist approach works well in their culture, but could cause problems in societies that value individuality. Next, does accepting death as it is make people passive? If death is normal and bound to happen, why fight diseases? Why create life-saving medicine? Why not just accept death when it comes? Buddhism suggests that while death is unavoidable, working to reduce suffering is a noble goal. But too much focus on acceptance could lead to a fatalistic attitude. Also, the concept of rebirth in Buddhism can be debated. If taken literally, it requires belief in a philosophical idea some might find hard to accept. If seen only as a psychological concept, it might lose its reassuring effect. The question is whether these Buddhist practices can be valuable without embracing Buddhist beliefs. Despite these hurdles, Buddhist techniques still offer ways to handle the fear of death. Mindfulness meditation helps break the cycle of anxiety about dying in the future. Practicing kindness to yourself and others strengthens connections, reducing the loneliness of facing death. Keeping in mind that things are always changing can help you appreciate every moment more. These practices are flexible, even for non-Buddhists seeking better ways to cope with the concept of mortality. Then there's Epicurean philosophy, offering yet another perspective. Epicurus didn't just think death was no big deal because we won't be around to feel it. He came up with a whole way of living to avoid the fear of dying. He was all about reaching a place of calm and inner peace. In his view, the key was enjoying the simple things, like hanging out with friends, pondering life, and sharing basic meals. Going after fancy pleasures only makes you dependent and worried, constantly anxious about losing what you have and always wanting more, which only leads to dissatisfaction. On the flip side, simpler pleasures are more dependable, less stressful, and offer true contentment. Epicurus believed that worrying about death stemmed from wrong ideas, and by changing these beliefs, we could conquer that fear. Death is nothing to us. There's no scary afterlife, and the gods aren't out to get us. Understanding this means living peacefully without fearing death. Epicurus also thought our fear of dying was taught by culture. Kids aren't naturally scared of death. It's something society teaches them. Once you get rid of these made-up cultural fears, like religious threats or spooky myths, our natural fearlessness comes back. We're born without fear of death, and through deeper thinking, we can return to that state. Critics argue that Epicurus might be simplifying things too much, as it's possible our fear of death is ingrained from evolution. We might be wired to fear death because it keeps us alive. Purely logical arguments might not overcome these instincts. Even if Epicurus is right that death doesn't harm us, logic alone might not change how we feel. Still, Epicurean ideas are useful, as much of our death anxiety comes from fears that philosophy could help address. Fear of religious consequences can be eased by realizing there's no evidence for them. Worries about not being around for future events can be calmed by focusing on the present. Epicurus' method offers a non-religious way of dealing with thoughts about death. Today's philosophers question if accepting death is always the right path. Some say death is truly negative and pretending it's not isn't correct. Accepting early, unjust deaths seems morally wrong. Take a child dying from a preventable disease. It feels right to be angry and fight to stop such things rather than taking it stoically. Accepting death and moving forward feels right for natural deaths in old age, but not those that could be avoided. This raises ethical questions in medicine. Should doctors tell terminal patients to make peace with death or always encourage fighting for life? The best approach depends on the context. When further medical treatment just brings more pain, acceptance seems wise. When there are effective treatments, battling for life is sensible. The trick is to grasp each individual situation. Palliative care has taken a practical route, balancing reality without giving false hope. Doctors are honest about what's to come, but they focus on comfort. The goal isn't to resist death at all costs or surrender too soon, but to seriously consider what's realistic and focus on life quality, not just duration. The concept of a good death is becoming more common in today's talks. Cultures have different ideas. A good death might mean being home with loved ones, passing quietly without suffering, retaining self-respect and independence, or being in sync with nature or spiritual beliefs. These ideals shape how people face death and make healthcare decisions. Philosophy can help pinpoint what makes a death good or bad beyond the timing. How death happens can make it better or worse. Passing away peacefully while asleep isn't like dying in agony. Leaving this world with family around is different from being alone. Facing death with acceptance differs from facing it with fear. These things matter beyond the actual moment of death. The practice of dying well, common in medieval and early modern Europe, involved learning to approach death with wisdom. People read about preparing for it, imagined their own end, and made thoughtful arrangements. People might find it a bit depressing these days, but there's something to be said for understanding that death is important enough to prepare for. We spend ages getting ready for careers that last only a few decades. So why shouldn't we also gear up for something as lasting as death? These days, we've mostly lost the knack for handling death. It seems like an impersonal clinical matter, far removed or even denied. Many folks end up passing away in hospitals, distanced from their families, with death often viewed as a medical failure instead of a natural end to life. This change in mindset has its consequences. People can find themselves facing death without any preparation, feeling frightened and with little understanding of mortality. Some philosophers think it's time to revisit the idea of preparing for death. This doesn't mean obsessing over it, but rather dealing with it sensibly. It could involve planning ahead for the kind of medical care you'd prefer or having open discussions about death with your loved ones. Consider what makes your life meaningful and whether you're living in line with that. Think about the legacy you want to leave. Taking these practical steps can help calm fears and improve the experience at the end of life. Another angle is the connection between death and virtue. Many beliefs suggest that being aware of our mortality encourages virtuous living.
Knowing our days are numbered often pushes us to live authentically, treat others with kindness, and focus on what really matters. If you assumed you had endless time, you might delay taking life seriously. But some question whether mortality truly nurtures virtue. Doesn't the fear of death possibly lead to being selfish or even aggressive? Terror management theory even proposes that fear of dying can trigger prejudice and violence. Maybe the impact of mortality on virtue depends on how we handle our awareness of it. Thoughtfully accepting death might cultivate virtue, while unconscious fears could lead to negative behaviors. The concept of memento mori, remembering that we must die, aims to use the awareness of mortality for good. Medieval monks used to keep skulls around to remind them of death. This wasn't meant to be morose, but to foster spiritual commitment. With limited time, none should be wasted. Live each day as if it were your last, which can create urgency and gratitude. Yet, if taken too far, memento mori might feel stifling. For some, constant reminders of death don't inspire motivation, but lead to paralysis or depression. This practice fits certain personalities and cultural backgrounds, but isn't universal. Finding the right balance of death awareness is key for each individual. As you journey through life, your relationship with mortality might shift. Young people need some awareness to avoid recklessness, but not so much that they lose sight of planning for the future. Those in middle age might need it to push them to finish important tasks before time runs out. The elderly need to accept death to face the end with less fear. Our understanding of mortality changes as we live our lives. Philosophy adds value by offering various perspectives on death. Stoicism advocates for accepting death with reason and aligning with nature. Buddhism emphasizes the impermanence of life, and Epicureanism promotes peace of mind through logic. Modern approaches mix these old ideas with contemporary psychology and health care. There's no universal answer that suits everyone. Different people in different situations require different approaches. But these philosophies agree on one thing: while death is certain, fear about it doesn't have to dominate. We can't escape death, but we can change how we handle it. Philosophy doesn't solve the issue of death, but offers new ways to embrace life with its reality. The goal is to find the right amount of fear, not complete fearlessness, to acknowledge death sensibly, and to keep a balanced awareness without getting obsessed. Part 8. Pushing the limits, extending life, digital afterlife, and tech progression. For centuries, death was an unchangeable reality. Philosophers advised on accepting it. But now, modern science has put the idea of significantly extending life, or maybe even immortality, on the table. This changes the philosophical discussion. We have to think not just about handling mortality, but about whether to beat it. Life extension research looks at various approaches. Some focus on slowing aging by getting a better grip on how cells work. Telomeres, those little caps on the ends of your DNA, get shorter with each cell split. Once too short, cell division stops and aging kicks in. Can we find a way to keep them longer to delay aging? Research hints it might be possible, though there are cancer risks. Other strategies involve flushing out senescent cells,
those that stop dividing but don't die. These cells accumulate and release harmful stuff. Senolytics, a type of drug, can clear them out. Early mouse tests show promising results. Mice treated live longer and are healthier. Human tests are underway. Cutting calorie intake can lengthen lab animals' lives. Rats on a calorie-cut diet live longer. This happens because metabolism slows aging. But extreme calorie cuts aren't practical or healthy for us. So now there's a push for drugs offering the same perks without constant hunger. Some researchers aim even higher. Aubrey de Grey thinks aging is a fixable disease. His plan is engineered negligible senescence, keeping the body young with regular upkeep to handle wear and tear. This approach includes clearing senescent cells, eliminating metabolic waste, using stem cell therapy, and more. Critics argue de Grey might be overselling it. Aging isn't just one issue. It's a bunch of interlinked challenges. Solving one can lead to another. Cancer and aging often work in opposition. Cancer prevention might speed aging and vice versa. Completely beating aging might not be possible due to biological trade-offs. But even small steps would be huge. Slowing aging enough to push healthy life to 150 or 200 years would change everything. Many philosophies on death assume lifespans of 70 to 90 years. But what if we live much longer? Stretching life brings huge ethical issues. First, there's the fairness of who gets it. New tech would be pricey at first. Only the wealthy might afford it, giving them lifespans and centuries while others don't. This feels wrong. Yet, waiting for it to be affordable could mean needless losses. What's worse? Then there's population and resource issues. Doubling lifespans might double the population, even with less births. We need a balanced population to keep things stable. If lifespans increase like that, resources might get strained. Should we limit births to offset longer lives? Or skip telling people they can have kids, creating a generational gap? Then there's societal standstill. As people live longer, they gather influence, wealth, and status. Longer lives could mean deepening inequality. No society change, no new ideas. A society that thrives on new blood might struggle. Critics argue these aren't reasons to ignore life extension, but challenges to solve. We should aim to extend lives while making access fair, keeping population balanced, and social systems innovative. Don't just let people die to sidestep social challenges. Solve the challenges. Plus, life extension isn't all or nothing. Even small benefits, like adding healthier years, are worth pursuing. Immortality isn't necessary to benefit from this research. Staying healthy till the very end could boost many lives, even without adding more years to live. But the big question remains, is living a super long life something people actually want? We talked over William's idea that endless life could get boring. But what about living for 200 years? It might be enough time to pursue big dreams without crossing into the realm of tedium. There's probably a sweet spot for lifespan, longer than now, but not infinite. And then there's this whole digital immortality thing, completely different concept. Instead of making our biological lives longer, we could, hypothetically, upload our minds to computers. Imagine your brain being scanned down to the tiniest detail and recreated as a simulation with your memories, personality, and values. Your physical self might die, but you'd keep going online, maybe forever. So, folks are pondering, would this digital version truly be you? Or is it merely a duplicate and you're actually gone? This taps into a famous philosophical debate about what makes you, well, you. Some argue your physical self is what truly matters. You are your body, and a perfect replica isn't really you. If your brain were scanned and uploaded, the thought goes, you're still the one to die. The digital version is just a separate individual, even if it seems just like you. This ties your identity to your physical form. But that raises questions too. Your body is constantly changing. Cells renew, and most of the atoms you're made of now weren't there 7 years ago, yet you're still you. So maybe you're not defined by one specific set of atoms. Plus, there are beliefs that a psychological link maintains your identity, even as your physical body changes. Like, if your brain moved to a different body, you'd still remain yourself. Others believe that if the upload retains your mindset, then it really is you. It holds your memories and quirks, and from its perspective, it's always been you. The fact that it's now digital shouldn't matter. The essence lies in the pattern, not the biological makeup. But this throws up more questions. Think of this. If the upload doesn't destroy the original brain, you get scanned and keep living. Now there are two yous with your memories and personality, the original and the digital. How can both be you? Which one is the true you? It's quite a conundrum. A different approach might involve gradually replacing your neurons with artificial ones, piece by piece. With each swap, you'd stay conscious and remain you. Eventually, your brain would be completely artificial, yet you'd have been you the entire process. This seems to address identity better, but it's still complex. When do you stop being the original you? After the first change? Once you're more than half artificial? These are tough questions without simple answers. Our sense of self resists clear boundaries, but shifting to an artificial brain seems to demand them. Another challenge with digital immortality is whether a digital entity could truly be conscious. Would a computer simulation really have a mind, or just act like it does without actually experiencing anything? We don't fully grasp consciousness enough to know if it could exist on a computer. Some argue consciousness needs specific biological components that can't be replicated in silicon, perhaps quantum actions in brain microtubules or the brain's unique biochemistry. On the other hand, some think consciousness is about organization, not material composition. If you create a digital system that mimics the brain's function, it'll be conscious. What it's made of doesn't matter. It's about how it processes information. This idea is backed by some functionalist theories of mind, but it remains controversial. Even if digital consciousness is achievable, would living forever digitally be desirable? Imagine being in a computer-generated universe, tailored by programmers to be a paradise or a nightmare. Your existence hinges on whoever runs your simulation. They can power you down, alter your experiences, or even make digital life unpleasant. There's no guarantee of a positive digital life experience. Plus, digital immortality still faces the issue brought up by Williams about eventual boredom. Even as digital data, you'd have infinite time ahead. Would this really be different from living forever biologically and hitting a wall of monotony? Maybe a digital world could keep things exciting with endless updates and features. But there might still be limits.
Some transhumanists argue that we should concentrate on improving ourselves, not just making life longer. Instead of merely extending human life, why not aim to become something more? Post-human. By using genetic engineering or brain-computer technologies, we could enhance intelligence, manage moods to eliminate suffering, and extend our cognitive abilities beyond their natural scope. This raises questions about whether these enhanced beings are still themselves. If your intelligence increases tenfold due to artificial enhancements, are you still the same person, or have you become entirely different? Similar identity issues arise with the idea of uploading. Moreover, enhancement fuels debates about what it means to be human and genuine. Is there an intrinsic value in our current state of humanity, or should we embrace transformation into something completely new? The topic of enhancement also brings up fairness concerns. If some people get enhancements while others don't, inequality could soar, with enhanced individuals dominating those who aren't. Maybe everyone should get enhanced, or perhaps no one should, but imposing enhancement conflicts with personal freedom. If it's optional, the enhanced may overshadow the non-enhanced, effectively pressuring everyone to enhance or get left behind. Some philosophers advocate for morphological freedom, the freedom to alter your body and mind as you see fit. So, if someone wants to boost their smarts or upload their consciousness into a digital form, they shouldn't be stopped. It's their body, their choice. However, unrestricted morphological freedom presents challenges. What if someone transforms themselves into something dangerous? Or if enhancements give unjust advantages? Ethical frameworks for evaluating these technologies are still being developed. Traditional medical ethics focus on disease treatment and suffering reduction, but life extension and enhancement aim to elevate the human condition. Should we rely on current ethical standards or develop new ones? Some argue for a precautionary principle. Proceed carefully with technologies that have uncertain impacts. Life extension and digital immortality carry unpredictable effects, so it's wiser to take things slow, monitor outcomes, and proceed cautiously. Others argue that caution has downsides. Delaying life extension by a year results in millions of potential lives lost. Being overly cautious might lead to missing out on good opportunities for the sake of perfection. These philosophical discussions on overcoming death through technology mirror age-old dilemmas, but with a modern twist. What defines personal identity? What makes life meaningful? Where are the boundaries of human nature? What responsibilities do we have to future generations? Why do we view death as negative? Technology forces us to not just ponder these questions, but address them in real life, since our choices will determine what technologies we pursue. Some thinkers recommend a careful approach. Humans have evolved to live around 70 years, and significantly extending lifespan could bring unexpected psychological troubles. Plus, death serves essential functions like creating urgency, enabling generational turnover, and preventing power from becoming stagnant. It might be more prudent to accept our biological limitations instead of trying to overcome them. Critics see this as a bias towards what's familiar. Just because death has always been part of the human experience doesn't mean it's beneficial. If technology can diminish suffering and improve our lives, then why not use it? Accepting death just because it's a natural part of life is an example of the naturalistic fallacy.
Many natural occurrences like disease, pain, and death are not beneficial, and we leverage technology to address these issues.
This debate often reveals broader disagreements about the essence of human nature and progress. Some view human nature as something fixed and valuable, worthy of preserving rather than altering.
Conversely, others believe human nature is adaptable and should be enhanced. Some people are doubtful about using technology to combat mortality, while others find it promising. Even though there are philosophical arguments, research keeps moving forward. Scientists everywhere are focused on life extension, and tech companies are pouring resources into anti-aging projects. The real issue isn't whether we'll try to make lifespans longer, but how well it'll work out and what the consequences could be. Philosophy's role here is important, as it can help us grasp ideas, point out ethical dilemmas, and make us think about what we truly care about. The concept of overcoming death with technology illustrates that our connection to mortality goes beyond just philosophy. It's practical too. In most of history, the only option was to accept death. Now, choices are available. Should we pursue longer life? How much longer should it be? Who will gain from it? What will it cost? These questions aren't mere details. They delve into profound philosophical inquiries about what gives life meaning and what sort of future we hope to build. Part 9. Living in the Shadow, Thoughts about Life and Death. After thinking about whether death harms us, affects meaning, should be feared, or if aiming for immortality makes sense, the big question remains, how do we live knowing we'll die? This is where philosophy meets everyday life. Ideas need to guide how we act. Theoretical concepts should influence our choices in the real world. The first issue is how much we should think about death. We've looked at how being aware of death can either free or paralyze us, push us forward or drag us down. The old phrase, memento mori, tells us to always remember we will die. But modern psychology cautions against fearing death too much. So, how do we get the balance right? It likely depends on each person and their circumstances. Some folks benefit from often reflecting on death. It helps them be more focused, grateful, and genuine. Others get anxious and avoid it. They do better when they're not preoccupied with mortality. Understanding yourself is crucial. You need to pinpoint the degree of death awareness that helps you live well. For most, it's probably somewhere between constantly thinking about it and completely ignoring it. Sometimes reflecting on our mortality can help us reset our priorities, appreciate what we have, and motivate us to take action on important goals. But being obsessed with death prevents truly living. The goal is to have just enough awareness to inspire, not overwhelm. Certain events naturally make us think about mortality. Serious illness, losing someone we love, milestone birthdays, kids moving away. These events pull us out of daily routines and make us face the reality of limited time. Philosophy suggests using these moments for good. Rather than push away such thoughts, embrace them. They can tell us things about what we value and prioritize. Let your awareness of mortality inspire change. The next question is about how we spend our limited time. Given time's limits, how should we use it? Different philosophical ideas offer unique perspectives. Utilitarianism suggests aiming for the greatest good for the greatest number. Virtue. Ethics promotes building strong character. Existentialism urges living according to your own values. Buddhism emphasizes reducing suffering and promoting compassion. These philosophies provide various practical advice. Utilitarianism might propose effective altruism, using resources to benefit as many as possible. Virtue ethics could guide you to find a meaningful career, foster friendships, and develop wisdom and courage. Existentialism might encourage challenging societal norms and making choices true to yourself. Buddhism might advise meditation, simple living, and helping others. No single approach solves this debate. Different people might fit with different philosophies, or maybe combining ideas from various traditions works best. What's critical is having some guiding principles instead of aimlessly wandering through life. Mortality makes time precious. Don't waste it by living without intention. Recognizing mortality teaches us the importance of relationships. As we or those around us face death, relationships become a priority. Philosophical discussions about meaning often miss this, but everyday life shows us that love and connection are deeply meaningful. If you had a year left, spending time with loved ones would likely matter more than chasing accomplishments or engaging in philosophical debates. This indicates that relationships should be a life priority, not delayed until everything else is sorted out. We often postpone deep connections. I'll spend more time with my kids when work is less busy. I'll reach out to old friends when I get a moment. I'll show my love when the timing is right. But work never truly slows down. Time never truly becomes available, and the perfect moment never quite comes. Death is always a possibility. Live as if it's your last chance to connect with those who matter. One big takeaway is the significance of wrapping up the things that really count. We got into discussions on whether it's truly bad to leave projects unfinished. Practically speaking, though, not completing major tasks can leave someone with regrets. Imagine leaving a book half-written, a relationship unresolved, or an adventure incomplete. Such thoughts can haunt a person nearing life's end. It's important to identify what truly matters and aim to finish those things instead of dodging them forever. This doesn't mean cramming every single thing into your life. A part of wisdom is knowing you can't chase after every opportunity or experience. You can't visit all the places, read every book, or master every skill. Accepting those limits is essential. Focus on what you truly care about within those boundaries, and don't let trivial details distract you from what matters most. Reflections from those near the end of their lives highlight what people truly value. Common regrets tend to surface, overworking themselves, not expressing their emotions, losing touch with friends, not being true to themselves, and ignoring their happiness. These regrets show us how we often prioritize the wrong things. We let our work overshadow relationships, suppress our feelings for social acceptance, neglect friendships, conform to fit in, and delay happiness, hoping for the perfect moments. Philosophy encourages us to flip these patterns upside down. Work enough to meet your needs, but don't let it consume you. Don't bottle up your emotions. People regret the words left unsaid more than those spoken. Keep friendships alive. They won't thrive on their own. Stay true to your values, even if it means standing out from the crowd. Find happiness now, rather than waiting for better situations that may never come. Of course, this advice isn't always easy to follow. Economic demands can push people to work more than they'd prefer. Social norms may punish those who speak out honestly. Keeping up with friends consumes time that many lack. Living true to your values can be hard in settings that discourage individuality. Advising people to live without regrets assumes freedoms that aren't always realistic. Philosophy needs to acknowledge these hurdles but still offer guidance. Despite limitations, choices still exist. How you respond to limited options can make a difference. The Stoics believed you might not control everything around you, but you can manage your judgments and reactions. Even in challenging times, you can choose your mindset, focus on what's changeable, and maintain your integrity. The dilemma of choosing when to die arises for those with terminal illnesses or for very elderly people. Modern medicine can keep people alive indefinitely with aggressive treatments, but extending life isn't always a blessing. Some reach a stage where living becomes more painful than fulfilling. Should they opt for death then? Different ethical and religious beliefs provide various answers. Certain faiths strictly oppose suicide, seeing life as sacred and ending only by divine will. Others, like the Stoics and some Buddhists, allow for choosing death in dire situations, accepting rational suicide when life becomes unbearable. Today, medical ethics increasingly supports patient autonomy, permitting competent adults to decline treatments even if it results in death. The debate over assisted death continues. Some places allow terminally ill patients to get help with dying, providing prescriptions for drugs they can use at their discretion. Other places ban such practices, forcing individuals to endure unrelenting pain. Arguments on both sides involve autonomy, suffering, the sanctity of life, and potential misuse. From a philosophical standpoint, the argument for assisted death emphasizes personal choice and relief from suffering. If someone reasonably decides their life is no longer worthwhile due to a terminal illness and significant suffering, forcing them to keep living seems cruel. They should have the right to end life on their own terms. Critics worry about vulnerable people feeling pressured, the role of healthcare providers in ending lives, devaluing life, and potential misdiagnosis. Most folks hope to slip away peacefully in their sleep after enjoying a lifetime of good health. But with today's medical advances, that's not usually how it pans out. More often, people face a gradual decline with multiple health scares, lots of hospital trips, and eventually pass away in an intensive care unit. Philosophy can't change these facts, but it can help us think about what we really want and how to stand up for ourselves. Advanced directives let you spell out your choices for medical treatment if you can't speak for yourself. Would you want aggressive resuscitation, life support, or feeding tubes? These are tough decisions with no universal answers. But thinking them through while you're healthy means you can make choices that match your values instead of leaving those decisions to others when time is of the essence. Considering what you'll leave behind ties into what death means to you. What kind of legacy do you hope to leave? For many, it's about their kids and family history. Others focus on their creative work like art, writing, or innovations. Some care more about the institutions they built or contributed to, while others cherish the personal impact they've had on the people they've influenced. Philosophy suggests that legacy might not be as crucial as we think. Our urge to be remembered often springs from our fear of death. We seek immortality through lasting impact, knowing true immortality isn't possible. Yet, being remembered isn't required for living a meaningful life. Life's value comes from how you live it, not if you're remembered. Even famous people fade from memory over time. In the distant future, chances are no one will recall our names. Eventually, the universe will enter heat death, making all achievements pointless. This cosmic perspective suggests focusing on legacy might be misplaced. It's more beneficial to concentrate on living well rather than being remembered. However, leaving a legacy doesn't have to be about fame. Helping others thrive matters, even if no one remembers you. A teacher inspiring students, a parent raising loving children, or a friend offering support can leave a lasting impact without recognition. Legacy is about influence, not notoriety. Choosing to have kids is partly about facing mortality. Children provide a sense of continued existence. Your genes, values, and influence carrying on. But is seeking immortality through offspring a valid reason to have kids? Using children as a way to leave a legacy treats them as an end goal rather than an essence. Kids should be cherished for who they are, not seen as vessels for parents' legacies. Still, the ideas of mortality and children are linked. Our brief time here, as new generations come up in our place, shapes our thoughts on having children. We invest in them as they represent the future, even though we won't be around forever. This isn't necessarily exploitative if we genuinely value their well-being. Another aspect that needs attention is dealing with the practical side of grief. How do we handle the loss of loved ones? Philosophy traditionally delves more into our mortality than others. But for most people, losing those we love feels more immediate and painful than pondering our own end. Grief is the price of love. The deeper the attachment, the harder the loss hits. Some philosophies argue intense grief is unnecessary, given that death is natural and unstoppable. Stoics suggested we accept loss without excessive emotion. But this can seem unrealistic and perhaps even wrong. Grieving honors the relationship. To hide it may suggest the bond wasn't significant. Modern psychology regards grief as a lengthy journey. Simply deciding not to grieve isn't something philosophy can make happen. The pain fades over time, but it might never go away completely. Philosophy can help us make sense of loss, but it won't take away grief's sting. One philosophical insight is that grief stems from love. You mourn because the connection was profound. In this way, grief is not entirely negative, but also acknowledges the relationship's worth. Trying to avoid grief by steering clear of close bonds isn't the answer. It's better to love deeply and grieve than live without meaningful connections. It's pretty challenging to weave the reality of death into our everyday lives. Sure, we all know we're going to die someday, but feeling that on an emotional level isn't something most of us do naturally. And perhaps that's a good thing because constantly dwelling on death might prevent us from actually living life. Yet, if we completely brush it aside, we might miss out on living more thoughtfully. So, where's that sweet spot? Maybe we should adopt certain rituals or practices that gently remind us of our mortality now and then. Trips to a cemetery, attending funerals, remembering death anniversaries,
or even reading obituaries can be nudges to acknowledge the inevitable without turning it into an obsession. Different cultures have their unique ways of keeping death in mind. Buddhists might meditate on it, Christians pray for those nearing the end, and Jewish traditions have specific ways to mourn. On the flip side, our modern secular society has lost touch with profound death rituals. Funerals can become quick affairs, often dressed up and sanitized. We often say someone passed away instead of died, and the deceased are quickly moved to funeral homes rather than being cared for at home. This clinical approach might hinder our ability to grapple with mortality healthily. Some philosophers advocate for embracing the truth about death and making it a part of our conversations instead of treating it like a taboo. This could mean discussing it with kids, visiting relatives who are nearing the end, or talking about our own wishes for the end. Turning death into a regular discussion may lead to a healthier perspective. When we confront mortality, it brings the question of life's purpose to the forefront. With life being limited, what's the point of it all? Religions often have clear answers: serving God, preparing for an afterlife, or fulfilling a divine mission. But from a secular standpoint, finding meaning can be tougher. Without a grand cosmic purpose, how do we find meaning? A secular idea is that we carve out our own purpose through the choices and values we hold dear. Life might not hand us meaning on a silver platter, but we create it through projects and relationships that matter. This approach offers both immense responsibility and incredible freedom, since you get to shape your meaning rather than following a predefined path. Another take focuses on well-being, finding joy, reducing suffering, developing virtues, connecting with others, learning, and creating beauty all contribute to life's purpose. This aligns purpose with what makes us human rather than just individual choices. We thrive when we reach our unique human potential. Plus, consider the impact we have, making the world a better place for others. Through work, family, community, politics, or creative endeavors, we can leave a lasting mark. This sort of purpose endures because what you've done to make things better lives on. These various purposes aren't mutually exclusive. A fulfilling life could blend personal meaning, flourishing by tapping into human potential and enhancing the well-being of others. The key is having a sense of purpose instead of drifting aimlessly, as mortality reminds us that we don't have all the time in the world. Finally, there's a practical question of how to approach death when the time comes. Many of us wish for a calm end, surrounded by loved ones, with minimal pain. But wishing isn't the same as planning. To face the end well, we need some groundwork. This doesn't mean fixating on death, but rather organizing practical matters to make the process less stressful. That includes writing a will, appointing someone to make medical decisions if you're unable, sharing your wishes with family, and maybe even planning your funeral. These tasks might not be pleasant but are crucial. Ignoring them adds unnecessary burdens on others and increases the chances of dying in a way you wouldn't choose. Part of dying well also means preparing mentally and spiritually. Coming to terms with life involves accepting past decisions, forgiving yourself and others, closing important relationships, and addressing unfinished emotional business. Those who deal with this while they're still healthy tend to approach death with fewer regrets and fears.
Avoidance can lead to added challenges down the line.
Ultimately, philosophy's most valuable role might be in helping us determine what truly matters. Socrates was onto something when he said that reflecting on our lives makes them truly worthwhile. It helps us stick to our core values rather than just blending in with the crowd. And given that our time on this planet isn't unlimited, there's a real push to make the most out of it. Various perspectives on death, from Epicurean musings to deprivation theories and thoughts by Heidegger on being true to oneself, are all pushing us to think about how best to live. Philosophy isn't really about nailing down hard conclusions. It's more about thinking deeply. To live well, knowing we're not here forever, means striking the right balance. We should be mindful enough of our mortality to stay driven, yet not so fixated that it paralyzes us. Recognizing our limited time helps keep fear in check, encouraging us not to rest on our laurels. Concerns about what we'll leave behind can motivate us to make a difference, but shouldn't prompt us to neglect the relationships and moments that matter now. It's all about diving into what life offers while being cool with the goals we might never meet. There's no one-size-fits-all for achieving this balance. It's something everyone must explore on their own through reflecting and trying things out. While philosophy can provide the tools and ideas, it's down to you to make them count in your life. The goal isn't about becoming a philosophy expert. It's about gaining the kind of wisdom that helps you live well despite knowing life isn't endless. Curiously enough, it's the fact that life is bounded by death that makes it incredibly precious. The urgency, thrill, and weighty moments that stem from having limited time aren't burdens. They're gifts. If life were endless, we might miss out on all this richness. Even though death implies loss and is naturally quite scary, it also sets the stage for life's true value. Being mortal is a big part of being human. To understand ourselves, we have to grasp this mortality, and living well means coming to terms with it. The debates about death will roll on as long as philosophy does. Even while these discussions happen, the spotlight stays on how we actually live day to day. Death is the inevitable fate we share, along with everyone we care for. The universe doesn't particularly care about us being here, and our time is ticking. These harsh realities infuse life with uniqueness and urgency. The real philosophical question isn't just pondering these things, but deciding how you're going to use this insight. Your daily choices hold the answer.